Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a really fascinating text called Mission First. If you've ever wondered exactly how political movements survive under immense, intense pressure, well, we're going to break down its core concepts on political leadership, media narratives, and movement discipline to find out. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at redefining command, the first-term record, reality versus narrative, manufactured doubt, and finally, a field guide to discipline. Let's dive right in. Section 1, Redefining Command Under Fire. Let's take a look at how the author builds their foundational argument about what genuine leadership actually requires. Right off the bat, the book completely dismisses things like likability and polish. It makes this really striking argument. You don't choose a commander because they make you feel comfortable. You choose them because they can take a hit, absorb the pressure, and just keep moving. The text argues that while the system often produces very careful, credentialed performers, true command is recognized only under sustained external pressure. And that brings us to a massive distinction the text makes, being proven versus being popular. It's basically night and day. In this framework, proven doesn't mean you're universally liked or getting standing ovations from editorial boards. It means you've been tested against real, hostile conditions, and you held your ground. The text warns that adversaries constantly try to blur these lines, attempting to replace actual proof of capability with mere popularity just to destabilize a movement. Moving to Section 2, the first-term record. The author argues measurable results are the ultimate evidence of successful leadership. So let's look at the data. Take a look at this number, 3.5. Before the global disruptions of 2020, the overall unemployment rate actually fell to exactly 3.5%. That's a 50-year low that completely defied mainstream institutional predictions. The text points to this specific stat as concrete proof that the deployed economic strategies really did work in the real world, despite widespread claims by established experts at the time that numbers like this were, frankly, impossible. Let's dig into the tangible outcomes here. Real median household income, up by over $6,000. Manufacturing jobs, over 500,000 added. This directly challenged the prior establishment consensus that claimed those manufacturing jobs were just permanently gone. The book uses this data to argue that the administration actually successfully executed its economic mission, totally contrary to what institutions expected. And, it wasn't just economics. The book highlights objective, diplomatic, military, and judicial achievements, too. We're talking about brokering the Abraham Accords, forcing a $13 billion increase in NATO burden sharing, and defeating the ISIS caliphate, all while initiating 0 new armed conflicts. The text presents this as documented, historical proof of operational capability, which kind of sets the stage for a massive clash with the press. All right, Section 3, the gap, reality versus narrative. Let's see how the text contrasts these objective milestones with the media coverage. So the author points out a huge, deliberate gap here. On one side, you have measurable, objective results. On the other, what the text calls manufactured noise. When you see someone dismissing those objective milestones we just talked about as failures, the book claims you aren't seeing ignorance. You're actually witnessing the direct product of an information environment designed specifically to suppress the objective record and amplify coordinated opposition. This whole dynamic is driven by something the text calls institutional leverage. It's basically how unelected institutions, think career bureaucracies, academia, the press, how they subtly shape public reality. They manage the Overton window, dictating what's considered acceptable to even talk about without ever needing to win an election. The book frames this as the absolute primary external threat to any citizen-led movement. Which leads us to Section 4, the threat of manufactured doubt. Let's look at the internal vulnerabilities a movement faces. If institutional leverage is the external threat, internal fragmentation is the real danger. Here is the exact anatomy of an attack used to turn members against each other. First, target identification, exploiting a pre-existing tension in the group. Second, amplification, using coordinated networks to artificially blow that conflict out of proportion. And finally, institutionalization, turning a temporary disagreement into a permanent divide that fractures the movement. The text identifies 2 very specific internal traps to watch out for. First is the purity spiral, where extreme voices demand increasingly impossible standards, kind of consuming the movement from the inside. Second is the premature declaration, basically followers hastily claiming leadership has compromised based on incomplete info.
The author passionately argues that followers have got to learn the difference between genuine feedback and this manufactured, ego-driven noise.
Section 5, A Field Guide to Discipline. Let's get into the tactical playbook for staying united during intense opposition.
This is quite literally an instruction manual for movement members. To resist these psychological operations, you have to practice specific disciplines. Wait for the full picture. Remember, leadership operates on a timeline of months, while social media operates on hours. Practice positive communication. And my favorite, employee status detachment. That means focusing entirely on tangible mission outcomes, not your own social media clout or engagement metrics. The core takeaway here is that internal discipline is your primary defense against division. Look at these elements: unity, discipline, and endurance. They rely entirely on one another. Unity binds everyone to a shared goal. Discipline ensures you actually execute your standards. And endurance lets you survive sustained attacks. Without all three functioning together, the text argues the movement is just going to inevitably collapse under the pressure.
Ultimately, it all comes down to this: true loyalty is principled, not blind. The book frames mission success as relying on followers who prioritize long-term, measurable effectiveness over short-term popularity. It requires clear-eyed accountability, a real understanding of the mission, and a strict refusal to let emotional reactions hand an advantage to the opposition. So we're left pondering this really provocative question about modern political organizing. When a movement is truly tested under fire, will it be their popularity or their disciplined mastery of these structural tactics that ultimately decides their fate? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the narrative.